into our production schedule. There was no reason why the road should not have had a schedule, but it did not. The delays became legal matters to be taken up in due legal course. That is not the way of business. We think that a delay is a criticism of our work and is something at once to be investigated. That is business. The railroads in general have broken down, and if the former conduct of the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton is any criterion of management in general, there is no reason in the world why they should not have broken down. Too many railroads are run, not from the offices of practical men, but from banking offices and the principles of procedure. The whole outlook are financial, not transportational, but financial. There has been a breakdown simply because more attention has been paid to railroads as factors in the stock market than as servants of the people. Outworn ideas have been retained, development has been practically stopped, and railroad men with vision have not been set free to grow. Will $1 billion solve that sort of trouble? No. $1 billion will only make the difficulty $1 billion worse. The purpose of the billion is simply to continue the present methods of railroad management, and it is because of the present methods that we have any railroad difficulties at all. The mistaken and foolish things we did years ago are just overtaking us. At the beginning of railway transportation in the United States, the people had to be taught its use, just as they had to be taught the use of the telephone. Also, the new railroads had to make business in order to keep themselves solvent. And because railway financing began in one of the rottenest periods of our business history, a number of practices were established as precedents, which have influenced railway work ever since. One of the first things the railways did was to throttle all other methods of transportation. There was the beginning of a splendid canal system in this country, and a great movement for canalization was at its height. The railroad companies bought out the canal companies and let the canals fill up and choke with weeds and refuse. All over the eastern and in parts of the middle western states are the remains of this network of internal waterways. They are being restored now as rapidly as possible. They are being linked together. Various commissions, public and private, have seen the vision of a complete system of waterways serving all parts of the country. And thanks to their efforts, persistence, and faith, progress is being made. But there was another. This was the system of making the haul as long as possible. Anyone who is familiar with the exposures which resulted in the formation of the Interstate Commerce Commission knows what is meant by this. There was a period when rail transport was not regarded as the servant of the traveling, manufacturing, and commercial publics. Business was treated as if it existed for the benefit of the railways. During this period of folly, it was not good railroading to get goods from their shipping point to their destination by the most direct line possible, but to keep them on the road as long as possible, send them around the longest way, give as many connecting lines as possible a piece of the profit, and let the public stand the resulting loss of time and money. That was once counted good railroading. It has not entirely passed out of practice today. One of the great changes in our economic life to which this railroad policy contributed was the centralization of certain activities, not because centralization was necessary, nor because it contributed to the well-being of the people, but because, among other things, it made double business for the railroads. Take two staples, meat and grain. If you look at the maps which the packing houses put out, and see where the cattle are drawn from, and then, if you consider that the cattle, when converted into food, are hauled again by the same railways back to the place where they came from, you will get some sidelight on the transportation problem and the price of meat. Take also grain. Every reader of advertisements knows where the great flour mills of the country are located. And they probably know also that these great mills are not located in the sections where the grain of the United States is raised. There are staggering quantities of grain, thousands of trainloads, hauled uselessly long distances, and then in the form of flour, hauled back again long distances to the states and sections where the grain was raised, a burdening of the railroads which is of no benefit to the communities where the grain originated, nor to anyone else except the monopolistic mills and the railroads. The railroads can always do a big business without helping the business of the country at all. They can always be engaged in just such useless hauling. On meat and grain, and perhaps on cotton too, the transportation burden could be reduced by more than half by the preparation of the product for use before it is shipped. If a coal community mined coal in Pennsylvania and then sent it by railway to Michigan or Wisconsin to be screened, and then hauled it back again to Pennsylvania for use, it would not be much sillier than the hauling of Texas beef alive to Chicago, there to be killed, and then shipped back dead to Texas, or the hauling of Kansas grain to Minnesota, there to be ground in the mills and hauled back again as flour. It is good business for the railroads, but it is bad business for business. One angle of the transportation problem to which too few men are paying attention is this useless hauling of material. If the problem were tackled from the point of ridding the railroads of their useless hauls, we might discover that we are in better shape than we think to take care of the legitimate transportation business of the country. In commodities like coal, it is necessary that they be hauled from where they are to where they are needed. The same is true of the raw materials of industry. They must be hauled from the place where nature has stored them to the place where there are people ready to work them. And as these raw materials are not often found assembled in one section, a considerable amount of transportation to a central assembling place is necessary. The coal comes from one section, the copper from another, the iron from another, the wood from another. They all must be brought together. But wherever it is possible, a policy of decentralization ought to be adopted. We need, instead of mammoth flour mills, a multitude of smaller mills distributed through all the sections where grain is grown. Wherever it is possible, the section that produces the raw material ought to produce also the finished product. Grain should be ground to flour where it is grown. A hog-growing country should not export hogs, but pork, hams, and bacon. The cotton mills ought to be near the cotton fields. This is not a revolutionary idea. In a sense, it is a reactionary one. It does not suggest anything new. It suggests something that is very old. This is the way the country did things before we fell into the habit of carting everything around a few thousand miles and adding the cartage to the consumer's bill. Our communities ought to be more complete in themselves. They ought not to be unnecessarily dependent on railway transportation. Out of what they produce, they should supply their own needs and ship the surplus. And how can they do this unless they have the means of taking their raw materials, like grain and cattle, and changing them into finished products? If private enterprise does not yield these means, the cooperation of farmers can. The chief injustice sustained by the farmer today is that, being the greatest producer, he is prevented from being also the greatest merchandiser, because he is compelled to sell to those who put his products into merchantable form. If he could change his grain into flour, his cattle into beef, and his hogs into hams and bacon, not only would he receive the fuller profit of his product, but he would render his nearby communities more independent of railway exigencies and thereby improve the transportation system by relieving it of the burden of his unfinished product. The thing is not only reasonable and practicable, but it is becoming absolutely necessary. More than that, it is being done in many places, but it will not register its full effect on the transportation situation and upon the cost of living until it is done more widely and in more kinds of materials. It is one of nature's compensations to withdraw prosperity from the business which does not serve. We have found that on the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton we could, following our universal policy, reduce our rates and get more business. We made some cuts, but the Interstate Commerce Commission refused to allow them. Under such conditions, why discuss the railroads as a business or as a service? End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. Things in General. No man exceeds Thomas A. Edison in broad vision and understanding. I met him first, many years ago, when I was with the Detroit Edison Company, probably about 1887 or thereabouts. The electrical men held a convention at Atlantic City, and Edison, as the leader in electrical science, made an address. I was then working on my gasoline engine, and most people, including all my associates in the electrical company, had taken pains to tell me that time spent on a gasoline engine was time wasted, that the power of the future was to be electricity. These criticisms had not made any impression on me. I was working ahead with all my might, but being in the same room with Edison suggested to me that it would be a good idea to find out if the master of electricity thought it was going to be the only power in the future. So, after Mr. Edison had finished his address, I managed to catch him alone for a moment. I told him what I was working on. At once he was interested. He is interested in every search for new knowledge. And then I asked him if he thought that there was a future for the internal combustion engine. He answered something in this fashion: yes, there is a big future for any lightweight engine that can develop a high horsepower and be self-contained. No one kind of motive power is ever going to do all the work of the country. We do not know what electricity can do, but I take for granted that it cannot do everything. Keep on with your engine. If you can get what you are after, I can see a great future. That is characteristic of Edison. He was the central figure in the electrical industry, which was then young and enthusiastic. The rank and file of the electrical men could see nothing ahead but electricity, but their leader could see with crystal clearness that no one power could do all the work of the country. I suppose that is why he was the leader. Such was my first meeting with Edison. I did not see him again until many years after, until our motor had been developed and was in production. He remembered perfectly our first meeting. Since then, we have seen each other often. He is one of my closest friends, and we together have swapped many an idea. His knowledge is almost universal. He is interested in every conceivable subject, and he recognizes no limitations. He believes that all things are possible. At the same time, he keeps his feet on the ground. He goes forward step by step. He regards impossible as a description for that which we have not at the moment the knowledge to achieve, He knows that as we amass knowledge, we build the power to overcome the impossible. That is the rational way of doing the impossible. The irrational way is to make the attempt without the toil of accumulating knowledge. Mr. Edison is only approaching the height of his power. He is the man who is going to show us what chemistry really can do, for he is a real scientist who regards the knowledge for which he is always searching as a tool to shape the progress of the world. He is not the type of scientist who merely stores up knowledge and turns his head into a museum. Edison is easily the world's greatest scientist. I am not sure that he is not also the world's worst businessman. He knows almost nothing of business. John Burroughs was another of those who honored me with their friendship. I, too, like birds. I like the outdoors. I like to walk across the country and jump fences. We have 500 bird houses on the farm. We call them our bird hotels, and one of them, the Hotel Pontchartrain, a Martin house, has 76 apartments. All winter long, we have wire baskets of food hanging about on the trees, and then there is a big basin in which the water is kept from freezing by an electric heater. Summer and winter, food, drink, and shelter are on hand for the birds. We have hatched pheasants and quail in incubators and then turned them over to electric brooders. We have all kinds of birdhouses and nests. The sparrows, who are great abusers of hospitality, insist that their nests be immovable, that they do not sway in the wind. The wrens like swaying nests, so we mounted a number of wren boxes on strips of spring steel so that they would sway in the wind. The wrens liked the idea, and the sparrows did not, so we have been able to have the wrens nest in peace. In summer, we leave cherries on the trees and strawberries open in the beds, and I think that we have not only more, but also more different kinds of bird callers than anywhere else in the northern states. John Burroughs said he thought we had, and one day, when he was staying at our place, he came across a bird that he had never seen before. About 10 years ago, we imported a great number of birds from abroad: yellowhammers, chaffinches, greenfinches, red pales, twites, bullfinches, jays, linnets, larks, some 500 of them. They stayed around a while, but where they are now, I do not know. I shall not import any more. Birds are entitled to live where they want to live. Birds are the best of companions. We need them for their beauty and their companionship, and we also need them for the strictly economic reason that they destroy harmful insects. The only time I ever used the Ford organization to influence legislation was on behalf of the birds, and I think the end justified the means. The Weeks-McLean Bird Bill, providing for bird sanctuaries for our migratory birds, had been hanging in Congress with every likelihood of dying a natural death. Its immediate sponsors could not arouse much interest among the congressmen. Birds do not vote. We got behind that bill, and we asked each of our 6,000 dealers to wire to his representative in Congress. It began to become apparent that birds might have votes. The bill went through. Our organization has never been used for any political purpose and never will be. We assume that our people have a right to their own preferences. To get back to John Burroughs, of course, I knew who he was, and I had read nearly everything he had written, but I had never thought of meeting him until some years ago, when he developed a grudge against modern progress. He detested money, and especially he detested the power which money gives to vulgar people to despoil the lovely countryside. He grew to dislike the industry out of which money is made. He disliked the noise of factories and railways. He criticized industrial progress, and he declared that the automobile was going to kill the appreciation of nature. I fundamentally disagreed with him. I thought that his emotions had taken him on the wrong track, and so I sent him an automobile with the request that he try it out and discover for himself whether it would not help him to know nature better. That automobile, and it took him some time to learn how to manage it himself, completely changed his point of view. He found that it helped him to see more, and from the time of getting it, he made nearly all of his bird hunting expeditions behind the steering wheel. He learned that instead of having to confine himself to a few miles around slab sides, the whole countryside was open to him. Out of that automobile grew our friendship, and it was a fine one. No man could help being the better for knowing John Burroughs. He was not a professional naturalist, nor did he make sentiment to do for hard research. It is easy to grow sentimental out of doors. It is hard to pursue the truth about a bird as one would pursue a mechanical principle. But John Burroughs did that, and as a result, the observations he set down were very largely accurate. He was impatient with men who were not accurate in their observations of natural life. John Burroughs first loved nature for its own sake. It was not merely his stock of material as a professional writer. He loved it before he wrote about it. Late in life, he turned philosopher. His philosophy was not so much a philosophy of nature as it was a natural philosophy. The long, serene thoughts of a man who had lived in the tranquil spirit of the trees. He was not a pagan. He was not a pantheist, but he did not much divide between nature and human nature, nor between human nature and divine. John Burroughs lived a wholesome life. He was fortunate to have as his home the farm on which he was born. Through long years, his surroundings were those which made for quietness of mind. He loved the woods, and he made dusty-minded city people love them too. He helped them see what he saw. He did not make much beyond a living. He could have done so, perhaps, but that was not his aim. Like another American naturalist, his occupation could have been described as inspector of birds' nests and hillside paths. Of course, that does not pay in dollars and cents. When he had passed the 70, he changed his views on industry. Perhaps I had something to do with that. He came to see that the whole world could not live by hunting birds' nests. At one time in his life, he had a grudge against all modern progress, especially where it was associated with the burning of coal and the noise of traffic. Perhaps that was as near to literary affectation as he ever came. Wordsworth disliked railways too, and Thoreau said that he could see more of the country by walking. Perhaps it was influences such as these which bent John Burroughs for a time against industrial progress, but only for a time. He came to see that it was fortunate for him that others' tastes ran in other channels, just as it was fortunate for the world that his taste ran in its own channel. There has been no observable development in the method of making birds' nests since the beginning of recorded observation. But that was hardly a reason why human beings should not prefer modern sanitary homes to cave dwellings. This was a part of John Burroughs' sanity. He was not afraid to change his views. He was a lover of nature, not her dupe. In the course of time, he came to value and approve modern devices, and though this by itself is an interesting fact, it is not so interesting as the fact that he made this change after he was 70 years old. John Burroughs was never too old to change. He kept growing to the last. The man who is too set to change is dead already. The funeral is a mere detail. If he talked more of one person than another, it was Emerson. Not only did he know Emerson by heart as an author, but he knew him by heart as a spirit. He taught me to know Emerson. He had so saturated himself with Emerson that at one time he thought as he did, and even fell into his mode of expression. But afterward he found his own way, which for him was better. There was no sadness in John Burroughs' death. When the grain lies brown and ripe under the harvest sun, and the harvesters are busy binding it into sheaves, there is no sadness for the grain. It has ripened and has fulfilled its term, and so had John Burroughs. With him it was full ripeness and harvest, not decay. He worked almost to the end. His plans ran beyond the end. They buried him among the scenes he loved, and it was his 84th birthday. Those scenes will be preserved as he loved them. John Burroughs, Edison, and I with Harvey S. Firestone made several vagabond trips together. We went in motor caravans and slept under canvas. Once we gypsied through the Adirondacks and again through the Alleghenies, heading southward. The trips were good fun, except that they began to attract too much attention. Today, I am more opposed to war than I ever was, and I think the people of the world know, even if the politicians do not, that war never settles anything. It was war that made the orderly and profitable processes of the world what they are today, a loose, disjointed mass. Of course, some men get rich out of war, others get poor. But the men who get rich are not those who fought or who really helped behind the lines. No patriot makes money out of war. No man with true patriotism could make money out of war, out of the sacrifice of other men's lives. Until the soldier makes money by fighting, until mothers make money by giving their sons to death, not until then should any citizen make money out of providing his country with the means to preserve its life. If wars are to continue, it will be harder and harder for the upright businessman to regard war as a legitimate means of high and speedy profits. War fortunes are losing caste every day. Every greed will someday hesitate before the overwhelming unpopularity and opposition which will meet the war profiteer. Business should be on the side of peace, because peace is business's best asset. And, by the way, was inventive genius ever so sterile as it was during the war? An impartial investigation of the last war, of what preceded it, and what has come out of it,